5 years from now, you're going to build a phenomenal business that makes a lot of money. And you're going to be really mad at yourself. Like, this person never did anything from me. And look at all the value I created for this person. You're going to regret. And instead, you wish somebody else would have gotten those shares. Or you continue and you avoided the dilution. You want to pick investors as you pick your team. We could not raise $1 or $1 from any single local investor in Brazil or Latin America. That's why being an entrepreneur is better than being an investor. When you show that slide to the Latin American investors, they run. The story of every big Silicon Valley company is the story of the small versus the big. The no assholes type of rule applies for investors as well.
This episode is brought to you by Scala, a company that offers complete human resources teams starting at $4.99 per month, which will help you with your day-to-day operations so you can focus on growing your business. Contact Scala today and start saving.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fundraising School. I'm Andrés Bilbao, one of your hosts, and today we have the absolute privilege of enjoying a conversation where we're going to learn a ton from Latin America's top entrepreneur, David Velez. Now, David Velez doesn't really need an introduction. Just off the cuff, I could say that he built the most successful business in Latin America. He challenged the status quo. He went against the biggest incumbents, essentially banks, and drove the whole wave of investing that has benefited so many of us in Latin America. We have nothing but appreciation and thanks for David. In this episode, David will share insights from his remarkable journey from his early days building a startup in Brazil to facing the challenges of disrupting a deeply rooted and challenging industry in the banking sector. And he'll talk about the importance of resilience and navigating regulatory hurdles. When you think of David, always try to remember that he's challenging himself, and that's something that we all could be absolutely inspired by. Watch out for all the lessons in resilience that I'm sure he's gonna send our way. It is an absolute pleasure for Laura and I to kick off this program, and what a better way to do it than with David, who's been a phenomenal inspiration for all of us. Just as a little bit of background, the way that this started was like most startups, right? Coffee shop. Laura and I help a bunch of founders raise. Ourselves, we've raised money quite a few times. And it's always extremely painful, at least for us, right? And we wanted to make sure that we could help as many founders as possible. And we came up with the idea of doing a series. And that's how this was born. We hope that you find this stuff useful. And that's a little bit of background on the program. Out.
To give you a little bit more of the numbers, we have 7,000 applicants over from 30 countries around the world. Of course, Latin America is the focus. So we have a lot of people joining us from Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and the rest of Latin America.
Right, and now I'm supposed to introduce David, but that's kind of like silly. We all know who he is and what he's done. But just as a couple of highlights, he's was born in Medellin, raised in Costa Rica, built a business in Brazil. So always an outsider, if you will. And under his leadership, Nubank revolutionized banking. He has built a wonderful business with over 90 million users and with a wonderful focus on user experience that I at least personally always try to learn from. It's a wonderful pleasure to have you here, David. And I just was saying before we started the recording that I nag you once or twice every year, but it's always extremely valuable. So thank you for that.
Phenomenal. This is a great effort. Congrats to you all for setting it up. The only thing I would change is the language. Why are we speaking English because we have non-Spanish speakers?
Yeah, we have a bunch of Brazilians.
We have over 30 countries around the world.
Okay.
From Australia to Patagonia. So that's why we're doing in English, but the vast majority definitely are people who are in Latin America.
Next time around, we'll switch to Spanish. Thank you for the feedback, and we'll improve on that one.
No, good. If we have so many people from all over the world, that makes sense. Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Great. So David, we wanted to start so that you can share a little bit of your entrepreneurial journey, of course. And I've had the absolute pleasure to meet your father, to meet Mari, and everyone in your family not only has this passion for entrepreneurship, but this passion for doing good while doing well. So we wanted to start with just your upbringing. Like what was it in your upbringing that shaped you on how you do business today?
Great. Well, my sister's here, so she's gonna keep me honest. And I think we grew up in I've talked about this a bit. We grew up in an environment with in my dad's side, there are 12 siblings. On my mom's side, 5 siblings, and they're effectively all entrepreneurs. Small businesses, medium businesses, really all sort. But we grew up in this environment where since I was 4 years old, I remember being in my dad's button factory doing button quality control, and looking at button by button, and the ones that look fine, putting them on the right, and the ones that look bad on the left. And spending weekends and spending a lot of vacations as I grew up, working with my father in his factory, and kind of just seeing how things happen, how you build a business, small business, medium-sized business from scratch. And I think the kind of within that family context, there's these values about building stuff and solving problems, and the fact that the goal was being your own boss. It was not having a boss. I remember my dad saying this a few times. Is like, if he needed to take vacation with his family, he could take vacation with his family. There was not a boss at the end of the line that he depended to. And so that, I think a lot of that way of thinking was very foundational. At the same time, especially a lot from my mother's side, there was also a lot of line of thinking around being socially useful and being socially aware and doing community work on vacation and going to a school and painting it in a vacation because we had to be useful and helpful and people needed our help and we had to contribute with however we could to the problems that existed in that community. And so that was also kind of very foundational. And combining those two, I think that's kind of the basis of seeing entrepreneurship as a way of life, but at the same time, seeing potential success as a way to also give back to that community. And also within the entrepreneurship aspect, building businesses that have a social component at the end of the day, that are going to make people's lives better, that are going to solve a useful problem, that are going to matter to people at the end of the day, being that we're all in a region of the world that has so much scarcity and where not everybody has access to the same opportunities that we had as we were growing up.
Double clicking on that, David, like how has your version of what success is evolved over time? When you were a kid, once you were building Nubank, and now as the lessons that you share with your kids on what success is? So
success was never and has never really been about making money. That's one thing it's very clear. I remember beginning of Nubank, even before that, that was never really success. Success was really never defined that way. I think if I were to try to define it, at least how I thought about it when I was in middle school, and then when I was in high school, and then was university, and then all around, I think success was about learning and about challenging myself and being in situations where I felt that I was significantly outside of my comfort zone. And then through a lot of hard work and a lot of focus and determination, was able to master whatever I was doing at the single point. And then I think that in the context of solving a problem that made sense, solving a problem that moved the needle, became an even bigger motivation. So at the beginning of Nubank, I think I recently liked a lot of the analogy of, I remember the early days, I like the analogy of the Odyssey. For whoever has read the book, I reread it a couple of months ago again, and Ulysses has to go back home after the War of Troy. And the entire book, which is a long book, is all about the journey. You have to go through this incredible journey. You have to listen to the mermaids sing, and you have to ignore the song of the mermaids, and then you have to face the Medusa, who's going to look at you and going to turn you into stone, and then you have to go and fight the Cyclops, which is these giants that have one eye. And at the end of the day, Ulysses gets home, and what's valuable is not getting home per se, is the journey. And to me, initially at Nubank, that was what got me really excited and continuing excited, is the journey. At that point, I remember thinking, this is probably the hardest thing I can imagine myself doing, building a bank in Brazil from scratch, with all the obstacles that that's going to entail, the fundraising, the regulatory. I'm not Brazilian. I don't have a contact. There were 100 reasons why this was not the right business to pursue. There were 100 reasons why this was too hard. In fact, the feedback for most people was, this is too hard. Why do you want to do that? And they said, it is too hard, almost as if doing something hard was a bad thing. And I heard, but I would hear the opposite. When somebody said, this is too hard, I would actually say, but that's great. Because if it's hard, then that means that I'm going to be able to push myself. If it's hard, then it's going to be a more interesting journey. If it's hard, then there's going to be more Cyclops and Medusas and challenges, and there's going to be opportunity more for me to learn. And if it's hard for me, then it's going to be hard for everybody, which means less competition. If you do something easy, it's easy for everybody. So you're going to have I remember when I was at Sequoia looking at Latin America, there were 3,000 clones of Groupon in the first 4 months. 3,000 clones. That's easy. You don't want to do easy. You want to do hard, because if it's hard, then maybe there's not 3,000 clones. Maybe there are only going to be 3 competitors or 4 competitors. So big, long answer to just basically say, I think for me has been that definition of success is this ability of doing something that allows me to challenge myself, to look at, to have a meaning, to have a sort of meaning beyond the day-to-day, beyond the making money aspect of it, and that ultimately it's a phenomenal journey. It's exciting, it's fun. I get to do it with people that I respect, that I learn from, and that at the end of the road, when I get home, I'll feel that it's been a very rewarding journey.
That's awesome. Mari did mention that one of your favorite poems was Ithaca, that goes in depth into that you don't have to lose the sight of that goal that you're wanting to do, but you have to enjoy the journey, because that's the most interesting part. And you need to make sure that you get to that final journey at the end of your life and not day one, right? So I think that's very, very interesting.
And I think also kind of just one thing, last final thing to say, I think it's useful to do that, to think about entrepreneurship from that perspective, because if the very beginning you define it as, I need to build a unicorn, I need to make a big business. If you just simply look at the statistics, that's probably not going to happen, right? Most startups fail. And then out of 100 startups, 90 fail. And then the other 10, maybe 1 will be a unicorn or 2 unicorns. So if you define success based on that, you have the entire odds. It's very likely it's actually not going to happen, just from a pure perspective. But if you define success up front as saying, I'm going to have the journey of my lifetime, you're not going to fail regardless of what happens. Even if the organization, if the startup doesn't succeed, you learn a lot. You build great relationships. You try to solve a great problem. You did something that was valuable. So I think from that perspective is one way to think about it is the perfect way to not disappoint yourself. It's gonna be a win-win no matter what.
Yes, that definitely. If the journey is the actual success, then you're always going to do something that it's special. You mentioned also that when you started, you were a complete outsider, which at the end of the day becomes really helpful. So that burden of expertise that sometimes can be that can sometimes be a barrier on innovating and seeing problems differently. You really didn't have it. But how do you balance, especially in an industry that's so regulated like finance, that mixture between bringing on people that are completely away from that problem and don't have experience in the sector versus bringing people who do have an expertise and could potentially help you speed the process?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I always say that I don't think I tell the story around how I got stuck in a banking branch in Sao Paulo, and that was painful, and it took me 5 months to open a bank account, and that entire experience was extremely painful. But it was painful, I think, especially painful because I was an outsider. Because I was coming from the outside, and then I was hitting myself against this banking door, and that was shocking to me. For the insiders, the Brazilians that have been in that environment, that have been customers of banks for decades, it happens a little bit like the frog in the boiling water. Like, you don't really feel it anymore. And when I would go talk to friends and say, but how is this possible? How are these banks doing this? They'd say, yeah, it sucks, but what are you going to do? You're going to go from this bank to that other bank? It's exactly the same thing. Or what are you going to do about it? Yeah. So, and there was a bit of even the way banks thought about it is like, yeah, we know we're bad, but who else is better than us? Or what is the alternative if all banks look the same? So, there's nothing you can do. So being an outsider is very helpful in that it makes you, it increases your level of sensitivity to situations that insiders have already taken for granted. That's actually I think one of the reasons why you see, if you go look at the percentage of Silicon Valley companies that have been started by immigrants, is pretty high. All of those were outsiders. It also helps that these people have no family, have no girlfriend, have no friends, have nothing, which by the way is my situation in Brazil when I moved. So there's only one thing that you do, which is work. So that all kind of helps also. But as you say, I think what we realized is being an outsider brings a lot of benefits, but it also brings a lot of blind spots that are very obvious. And we saw, if there's one thing that I would have done differently in the way I constructed the team in the early days, was I became a bit even dogmatic against people that had experience, which meant out of 100 people that we had, maybe 95 were outside the banking system. And we try to reinvent everything from scratch, everything. So collections. We didn't want to hear anybody from collections that had a collections background because we wanted to reinvent collection from scratch. We wanted to test everything from scratch. We wanted to test the models. After 3 years, we had one of the worst collections businesses in Brazil. If we had gone and brought somebody that knew collections, we would have saved ourselves 3 years of investment. But the dogma of rejecting any experience actually hurt us. So I would have done it very differently. I think really the ideal, I think that the science is, how do you really mix both? You want a combination, a team that combines, that have outsiders with insiders. And in different areas, you want different compositions. In the front end, if you're reinventing a product, you probably want more outsiders than insiders. But if you're building very large scale infrastructure, you probably want more insiders than outsiders. If you need an infrastructure to run with 100 million customers, you need people that have run infrastructure for hundreds of millions of people. You don't want to be testing a lot of new things. If you have critical processes that are regulated, you don't want to be taking a lot of risk, or regulatory or compliance. You want a lot of insiders. You don't want to be taking a lot of risk. But if you are building other areas, then you want more outsiders. So you need both. I think the art is figuring out, where do you want more outsiders? Where do you want more insiders? But then it's really evaluating and valuing that both have a lot of value to bring to the table.
That's quite interesting. At Rappi, we used to have this setup where we're always innovating. So it's a very innovative company. But every time we would do something that was already invented and we were like fucking up, we'd be like, why would we innovate on that? And we would always have a challenge to strike that balance. In saying that, like, you clearly highlighted something that you would have done differently, but there's some stuff that you're like phenomenal at. I particularly always learn whenever I try and research customer centricity and how you think about that. I'd love to understand, where did that focus came from, and how do you live it now and throughout the different stages of Nubank, customer centricity?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, like, I think that the first sort of blink of an idea happened in this banking branch as an outsider feeling the pain of a customer. It's like, how is it possible that these banks, the most profitable in the world, are treating people this way? And this is Sao Paulo, this is Faria Lima, this is the center of financial services in Latin America. And they were treating customers this way. 5 months to open a bank account, almost treated like a prisoner. Like the closest thing I compared to that experience, where you have to go to a bulletproof door with guards and wait, is either a prison, because in a prison, you also have to take your stuff out and put it in a locker and wait for, or in going through a security line in an airport. It's the same thing. You have to take all your clothes. You're seen like a criminal. That is the experience that consumers were having in Brazil. So out of kind of that view, I spent maybe 2-3 months really thinking through the business idea in end of 2012. and was very inspired about companies that were really putting the consumer at the front center. This was Amazon. Amazon talks a lot about being the most consumer-centric company in the world. This was Disney. Spent a lot of time understanding the culture of Disney and how they want to create these magical experiences. Went with my co-founders to Sapos in Vegas and saw that culture around how you create this culture around customer fanatism and if somebody calls you and says, didn't like my shoes, you send them another type of shoes, no questions asked. Like those type of statements were very powerful to me as source of inspirations around if the problem was this consumer experience, then how do you solve that? But if you think about it just generally, what technology has enabled has been increase of competition and decrease of entry barriers for effectively any industry or most industries around the world. This means a new world where there is a lot of alternatives. In a world where consumers have a lot of alternatives, consumer picks whoever treats them best. It's actually a very simple. It's so simple that I'm almost ashamed how obvious it is. The consumer will pick whoever treats them best, period. And if somebody treats you bad, you don't want to do business with them. And so it's almost like any consumer company should really use consumer centricity as their core fundamental value. There really shouldn't be any other value if you're a consumer company, because you're gonna be competing for somebody, and consumer has options, and they'll get to pick. So that's why we, out of kind of that understanding, we said that consumer obsession as our number one value since the very early days. I've spent a lot of time talking about how for us it was fundamental in the early days to set up the cultural values of the business. The culture of a company is built in the first 6 months with the first 10 to 15 employees. Those first 2 months, 3 months, those first 5 employees, it's a magical time to set up the basis of your culture. It's a little bit like the US when they set up their constitution. The constitution of the US is the cultural deck of the startup called the United States. And the founding fathers in the US were very thoughtful about the values that are in that constitution. The advantage of doing that at the early days is that once it's set, then you can grow for 200 years and you still know what the US or the Chicago Bulls or an organization, any human organization stands for. So we took those first couple of months very seriously. We set up those culture. Consumer obsession was there as number one value. And then we've spent 11 years actively trying to figure out how to execute that value, how to make customers love us fanatical. And every single new product that we launch, every single pricing decision, every single inconvenient decision, we try to see it through the lens of the consumer. At times it's hard. At times it's almost inconsistent with business model, with unit economics, with questions like that from a business perspective you're gonna be considering. But actually, in the long run, those things are actually fully aligned, because in the long run, the bet is if you treat the consumer the best, that consumer is going to be with you with 20, 30 years. And the craziness that you see in a lot of industries, including Brazilian banking, is banks spend $200 customer acquisition costs, and then they treated their customer like crap. It's like, why would you do that? Might as well don't even bring a customer. Might as well don't invest any money in market.
Yeah, I'm always awestruck by the capacity that you guys have had to let go of the short-term benefit in benefit of the long-term. Like I remember once we had this conversation where you talked a lot about taking all the marketing dollars and then putting them into customer service. And for me, that was kind of like someone speaking Chinese, but it was very, very enlightening. That was wonderful for me. And now we've discussed some stuff that you've done really well and some stuff that you would have done differently. But we're entrepreneurs and we're not like kidding ourselves. Let's talk luck. How do you think about luck, and what role do you believe that it's played in this journey of yours?
Oh, plays a huge amount of plays a big role. So, I mean, when I look back, having been able to meet the people at Sequoia and work there for 2 years was fundamental, because they ended up giving me the first check. I don't think anybody else would have given me a check to start this company. So I was very lucky to meet them. I was very lucky to meet Doug Leone, my mentor. But at the same time, it was luck that it was well used. If I'd done a crappy job for 2 years, if I had been lazy, they would have given me a check. I was at Sequoia at 4 a.m. every day. Well, because I had in business school. I was working from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. Then I had to go to school for 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Then I was back at Sequoia from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then I had to do homework, and then I had to sleep a few hours. So, yes, luck plays a role, but then a lot of hard work also plays a role. Then we get the funding, we get some of the money seed, and that allowed us to get going. And then I was very lucky in the way I met a lot of my co-founders. I wanted two very specific profiles. I wanted the insider because I was an outsider, and so I went and met a lot of insiders. And by pure luck, I met Christina, and it was an incredible amount of luck because she and I are so aligned in so many different ways. We're different in a lot of really good ways, but we're very similar in a lot of very good ways. And so it's been a phenomenal partnership. And also lucky to meet Ed, my co-founder in tech. I met a lot of CTOs, didn't really like anybody. And with Ed, I had a conversation with him on Zoom. And in 24 hours, he had flown from Chicago to my house. He was knocking my door in Sao Paulo with a bag this size saying, I'm ready to start a bank. So super luck. But then building that relationship with them, working through the conflicts, which always happen. Any team is going to have conflicts. Asking for help when we needed help, getting coaches, talking to our board members.
Sorry to interrupt. Speak a little bit about the coaches part. Like, that's really, really important. How do you think about the coaching?
Yeah. I mean, the best people in the world have coaches. Michael Jordan had coaches. Olympic athletes have coaches. We all need coaches, right? We don't have all the answers. And so being a CEO of a Brazilian bank when I was not Brazilian, I never ran a team when I started Nubank. I had never really even managed one person. And suddenly I was managing a team of 500 and then 1,000. It's like, so there were so many unknowns, so many questions, so much insecurity. Am I the right person to do this? Like, how much conviction should I put into this decision versus not? It's so easy to question yourself actively when you're making a lot of decisions based on intuition versus experience. So I think all of these required a lot of coaching, and I used a personal coach and therapy for a very long time. Chris had a coach, Ed had a coach, our entire executive team had coaches. We had one coach for everybody. And it was so helpful in us to learn to work as a team and to work through the disagreements and to help to communicate with each other. And that's what eventually allowed us to build a team that was very high performing and that today continue to work at a way that improves every week. So that was super helpful. But I used that also as a way to say we were lucky. I was very lucky in meeting these co-founders. But if there hadn't been skill, if there hadn't been the right investment, and if there hadn't been the hard work, we probably would have split. The company probably wouldn't exist anymore, or each founder would be somewhere else today. And who knows if we were where we are. Both co-founders are still working together. We're all working together 11 years in. So you need both. Luck is important, but you also need some talent. You need some intuition. You need a lot of hard work. You need a lot of advice and help.
And I think that's a great advice for everyone, like investing in that team dynamic from the very early stages is super important for the health of a company moving forward and to build like a strong culture. I think because you guys are Nubank today and Nubank is Nubank already, we all believe that it was kind of easy raising money in the whole process. Can you share a little bit more on how it was in the beginning, getting those initial investors? And also, how did you choose who would be the best real partner for Nubank from an investor perspective? Like, what does determine like a good investor moving forward?
Yeah, so in general, it was hard to raise money. It was not easy. It was hard, and we went through waves over the 10 years. There were good times, there were bad times, but if you think about it, we're this Brazilian bank that is giving credit to a bunch of people. in an economy that is contracting. You're trying to get investors, local investors will not give you any money because even until very recently, I would say maybe in the last 12 months, local investors have decided that they like to invest in Nubank. Before that, we could not raise $1 or $1 from any single local investor in Brazil or Latin America. Every single investor we talked to said no. Kasek was the only exception at the seed. Everybody else was basically a no. So we had to go to Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley, you would imagine the Silicon Valley VC guy sits on his road, opens Wall Street Journal in the morning, reads about Brazil, the type of news that they read. Corruption scandal, biggest recession in 100 years, high inflation, high interest rate, political dysfunction. It's like, why would I invest my money in that country? Especially in that Brazilian bank that is giving credit to a bunch of people. They're going to blow up any minute now. That was the entire framework of all of the Silicon Valley investors. So it was really hard to figure out how to raise money. Basically, in every single round, it was just talking to a bunch of people. Yeah, it definitely helped having Sequoia as a seed investor. That opened a lot of doors. But then a lot of people would kind of excuse themselves and leave as soon as we told them we were giving credit in Brazil. And then at the very end, we would always find somebody. Maybe luck plays here a little bit role, but we also had really good numbers. We had a great story to tell. We had a really strong team. At every single run size, we had prepared ourselves. We had kind of trained as a team several times to do the pitch. Fundraising is a lot about it's a sale process. You're effectively selling something. It helps when you're selling something that has real value and true value, because then people are going to buy it. You can sell something that has no value, and that works in bubble times. But if you have something that has true value and then you're good at selling it, then that maximizes your chances of getting some money. And I think we took that very seriously. We would close let's say we would close Series C or Series D. And we would already say, okay, what are we going to need? What are the metrics we're going to need 12 months from now or 18 months from now to raise Series D or Series F? If this is the NPV per customer today, this is where we want to be 18 months from now. This is the deck with the metrics we want to be using in 18 months with actual numbers. It's almost like we finished the Series C, and then immediately we did the Series D with the metrics we expected to have 18 months from now. And then we would go all in to try to execute on those metrics. Obviously,
like a vision board, like a vision board for companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this allowed us to like, what are the metrics that are important? Where do we want to be able to show progress round from round, and we want to continue to showing that there's progress in the story, and that we're making progress as we've raised additional money. And so anyway, it was a hard process, but we also took it, I think, seriously, and we were able to fund the capital at the end of the day. I think the biggest maybe insight, and today we're at a slightly different point in the cycle, but things will change, is there is just so much money in the world right now looking to be invested in good opportunities. And you all probably have seen it. The amount of funds, everybody has a fund. There are funds everywhere. There is a lot of people that want to be writing checks. So where there is true scarcity is on your side, it's in the entrepreneur side. And you want to position yourself where there is scarcity, not where there is oversupply. That's why being an entrepreneur is better than being an investor, because there continues to be scarcity on the entrepreneur side, not in the investor side. There's too much capital. So if there's so much capital, you'll find the capital that you need for your company. It will be fine. It will be there. It just, you might need to iterate a bunch. You might need to work in different ways, but there will be capital for good opportunities.
Yeah, that's awesome and very encouraging, because a lot of people have a sense that we're not in the best of times and there's not capital lying around, but there's actually a ton of capital in the market. And going back into this journey that was clearly hard, what would you say was the best piece of advice that you got in regards to fundraising? Like, what would be some things that you'd like to share with people here? So
first, I'm a big fan of the Sequoia deck. They actually have it in their website. You can just go and get it. This is kind of like the key questions that they look at, and actually the flow. It's a very simple flow, and it's a suggestion of how you organize the entire process. You begin with the problem, then you talk about the solution, then you include obviously market size, you include team, you include economics, you include sort of the different pieces. But I like that deck a lot. It's not long. You should not expect that you want a 100-page deck. It should be a 12, 14 slides deck. Number one. Second, I think market size really understanding market size is going to be probably one of the most important parts of assessing an investment opportunity. You cannot really build a big company in a small market. You can build big companies in big markets, but market is going to be the defining bottleneck. So understanding market sizes is pretty critical to get investors excited about how big this potential opportunity can become. I think I would think of just obviously a lot around describing very clearly the problem. I think iterating a lot on how you describe the problem, be very succinct with your language. If you need a page and a half to describe what your solution is, you're just not thinking clearly enough. I think some of the best investors are going to be listening really carefully about every single word that you use. And the shorter you can explain what you're doing, the bigger the clarity of thought that you have. If you cannot teach, if you're not kind of this happening even now, even inside a lot of the business ideas we want to be doing inside Nubank at times. I actually just remember we had a meeting yesterday about this. You read 3 pages and then you don't really understand what you're trying to do. So it's just much harder to do something short than something long. But like iterating again and again and again to try to get to a lot of clarity of thought around what is the problem and what is the solution and why are you uniquely positioned to solve that problem. Having a clear understanding around what makes you so unique, what makes your team so unique, what makes your solution so unique, what is the unique insight that you have. It's super important. And then I think maybe last thing I'll say, and obviously there's a lot I could say around this topic, is I think for Silicon Valley especially, the story of the small company with a good understanding of technology going after the big, large, fat incumbent is a beautiful story. The story of every big Silicon Valley company is the story of the small versus the big. Is the David versus the Goliath. I remember I had that slide of David versus the Goliath. When you show that slide to the Latin American investors, they run. They think it's the scariest thing that they've ever seen. Because in Latin America, unfortunately, the Goliath generally wins that race, right? In Silicon Valley, it's the opposite. The story of the small one going to the big one is the story of Apple, is the story of Cisco, of Oracle, of Google, of Facebook. So Silicon Valley likes that, but you have to really be able to explain them why can't the small one beat the big one? What is that core insight, that either technology or team that will allow you to beat the big incumbent? And it's also interesting because, as I said, if they're big incumbents, that means the market is big. So the fact that they're big incumbents mean that market size concerns is actually also solved from a market size perspective. So understand your audience, going back a bit to kind of selling 101 or marketing 101. Who is your investor? If it's Silicon Valley, you might want to sell the story in a one way. If it's a Latin American investor, you might have to position it in a bit of a different way. But kind of really understanding your customer in that case, which is that investor, is going to be really important to sell a story that makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. And I think it's quite challenging to address different audiences, but at the same time, you guys have done a wonderful job at positioning Nubank at the different stages. And now you've gone through all this journey and you're looking at yourself from the past. Like what kind of stuff would you have liked to know when you were earlier in the fundraising round, say seed or A, that you know now, but you didn't then?
It's a great question. I think one thing is, and I didn't answer this from your previous question. One thing is how important the specific partner at the specific investing firm is. You might get very excited about a logo or a brand, but then, and you let them invest in your company, but then they put somebody there that you didn't build a relationship with, somebody that is not really going to be able to help you. And so first would be very specific with the fund, who is going to be the board member. And you want to like that board member. And how do you pick investors? That's the question you asked me. You want to pick investors as you pick your team. In your executive team, every person in that executive team has a reason to be there. You have somebody in marketing, you have somebody in tech, you have somebody in product, you have somebody in finance, you have somebody in people. Everybody there has a function. Everybody there has a functional expertise. The same way you want to think about your shareholder, your cap table. Every name in that cap table, when you look at cap table, including angels, including big funds and small funds, they have to have a reason to be there. You're giving scarce shares to people. And so you want to be very specific around, it's almost like a question you want to be asking, would I hire this person to be in my team? When you're thinking, would I want this person to invest in my company? Because in a way, they're going to be in your team. And you want to pick people that are really going to be able to help you, that have this functional expertise. A lot of the times, especially a lot of the more finance-oriented backgrounds, they actually have a very hard time helping early-stage companies. The kind of consulting backgrounds type of investors, they don't really understand the problem that you're going to be going through in the early stages. So you want somebody that did engineering, because a lot of your questions are going to be around engineering. You want somebody that actually did sales if you're a B2B company, because a lot of what you want to do is set up a sales force. And so that is the background that you would want to be, and you want to be specific. And then also just say no to a lot of people that just want to write checks to you that you're not buying. Again, would you hire that person to your company? What's going to happen is that first, if you bring a lot of these angels in that add no value, first, there might be a burden. You might need to be like answering calls and answering questions, and it's going to be a huge distraction. But also, second, 5 years from now, you're going to build a phenomenal business that makes a lot of money, and you're going to go and see the value of the shares of some of these people, and you're going to be really mad at yourself. Like, this person never did anything from me, and look at all the value I created for this person. You're going to regret having allowed them to invest. And instead you wish somebody else would have gone into shares, or you continue and you avoided the dilution. So, so being very strategic and just kind of very thoughtful about your cap table and who's in there and what are the names and what are they going to bring, and having people first, nice people that you like to spend your time with. The no assholes type of rule applies for investors as well, and then second. Having your mind very clearly, who are you going to call for help, and do a list. What are the biggest questions that I have? And then as you meet investors, who is actually going to be able to help me answer some of these questions?
No, David, thank you so much. I think that was a wonderful way of closing the session and giving that advice to everyone that it's going through this process on being extremely thoughtful, not only on how they build their business, but also on the partners that they choose to be part of, their cap tables, their boards, and everything that they do. We can't be more lucky than to have you to kick off this 6 weeks. So again, thank you for spending the time with us.
It's a pleasure. And again, congrats to all of you, everybody that's starting a business. I hope you really enjoyed the journey. It's going to be a fun one. And thank you, Laura and Andres, for doing this. This is great. I think the ecosystem really, really appreciates it.
Folks, quick reminder, if you're raising a Series A or expect to do so over the next few months, you need to get your financials straight. And I would strongly recommend that you hire JP Donoso, the CEO and founder of Optics, to help you out in that regard. He worked at Rappi's internal team, we raised exceptional rounds with him, and he's helped dozens of world-class startups raise the rounds. So give JP a call.